Margaret Hayes stood before the courtroom mirror, adjusting the collar of her cream cardigan. At 52, she had learned that dignity was something you wore like armor, especially on days when your world was being divided down the middle. She had been married to Vincent Hayes for 27 years. 27 years of building a life together, or so she had thought. But 6 months ago, everything changed when she discovered text messages on Vincent's phone from a woman named Crystal, a 31-year-old marketing consultant he'd met at a conference. The affair had been going on for 2 years. Margaret remembered the night she confronted him. Vincent didn't even try to lie. He simply said he needed excitement and that Margaret had become too comfortable. The words cut deeper than any knife could. Now, here they were. Divorce court. The final chapter of their shared story. Margaret took her seat, smoothing down her skirt with trembling hands. Across the aisle, Vincent sat with his lawyer, his jaw set in that stubborn way she knew so well. And beside him, smirking like she'd already won some grand prize, was Crystal, Margaret's lawyer. A kind woman named Patricia Chen squeezed her hand gently. "Remember," Patricia whispered, "we have everything we need. Just stay calm." The judge, the Honorable Beatrice Morrison, entered the room. She was a woman in her late 60s with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense. "Good morning," Judge Morrison said, settling into her chair. "Let's proceed with the division of assets in the matter of Hayes versus Hayes." Vincent's lawyer stood first, his voice confident and smooth. "Your Honor, my client has worked tirelessly to build his financial planning business. While Mrs. Hayes contributed to the household, Mr. Hayes was the primary earner. We believe a 60-40 split in his favor is appropriate." Margaret felt her stomach drop. After everything, he wanted to take more than half. Patricia stood, her voice steady. "Your Honor, Mrs. Hayes put her own career aspirations on hold to raise their 3 children and support Mr. Hayes' business endeavors. She handled all household management, allowing him the freedom to focus on his career. Additionally, Mr. Hayes depleted their joint savings account by $60,000 to fund lavish gifts and trips for his extramarital affair." Vincent shifted uncomfortably. Crystal's smirk faded slightly. Judge Morrison raised an eyebrow. "Is this documented?" "Yes, Your Honor. We have bank statements, credit card records, and witness testimony." The judge nodded slowly, making notes. Then came the moment Margaret had been waiting for. Patricia stood again. "Your Honor, Mrs. Hayes would like to submit a letter for the court's consideration regarding the settlement." Judge Morrison gestured for the letter. A clerk brought it forward. The courtroom fell silent as the judge opened the envelope and began to read. Margaret watched Vincent's face. He looked confused, perhaps a bit nervous. He leaned over to whisper to his lawyer, who merely shrugged. Crystal whispered something to Vincent, her expression darkening. Judge Morrison read slowly, her expression neutral at first. Then, something remarkable happened. The corners of her mouth twitched, her eyes widened slightly, and then, to everyone's astonishment, Judge Beatrice Morrison, a woman known for her stern demeanor, burst into genuine laughter. It wasn't a polite chuckle. It was a full, delighted laugh that echoed through the courtroom. Vincent's face went pale. What does it say?" The judge composed herself, though her eyes still sparkled with amusement. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice rich with satisfaction, "your wife has provided documentation that the joint investment account you believed contained $200,000 was, in fact, transferred into a separate trust 6 months before you filed for divorce." Vincent shot to his feet. "She can't do that. That's my money." "Actually," Judge Morrison continued, consulting the documents, "Mrs. Hayes' name was the primary on that account, established with inheritance money from her late father. You contributed approximately 15% to it over the years." Margaret felt Patricia's reassuring hand on her shoulder. "But that's not the checkmate your wife is referring to, Mr. Hayes," the judge continued. And now she was smiling. "Mrs. Hayes has also provided evidence that you claimed the lake house property as a business asset for tax purposes 3 years ago. Since you classified it as business property, it falls under different rules in this divorce. Mrs. Hayes is entitled to fair market value compensation, which, according to recent appraisals, has appreciated considerably. Vincent's face turned crimson. This is ridiculous. You can't. Furthermore, Judge Morrison said, her voice taking on a sharper edge, the $60,000 you spent on your affair is considered marital waste. Mrs. Hayes is entitled to reimbursement, plus interest. Crystal stood up abruptly. This is unfair. Vincent loves me. We're building a life together. Judge Morrison's gaze could have frozen fire. Miss Reynolds, you are not a party to these proceedings. Sit down or leave my courtroom. Crystal sat, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. The judge turned back to Margaret. Mrs. Hayes, in your letter, you've requested primary ownership of the family home, that the contents of the joint investment account, 50% of Mr. Hayes' business valuation, and compensation for marital waste. Given the circumstances, the documented financial infidelity, and Mr. Hayes' misrepresentation of assets, I'm inclined to grant your requests. Vincent looked like he might faint. Your Honor, please, Mr. Hayes, the judge said firmly. You made your choices. You spent marital assets on an extramarital affair. You attempted to hide and misclassify property, and you stood in this courtroom today demanding more than your fair share from a woman who dedicated nearly 3 decades to your partnership. She stamped her gavel. Checkmate, indeed. This court finds in favor of Mrs. Hayes. Mr. Hayes, you'll be very fortunate to walk away with 30% after all debts and reimbursements are settled. Outside the courtroom, Margaret stood in the autumn sunshine, feeling lighter than she had in years. Patricia stood beside her, grinning. How does it feel? Patricia asked. Margaret smiled. Like justice. Like finally being seen. Her daughter, Emma, was waiting by the car. At 24, she had her mother's warm eyes and her grandmother's strength. She hugged Margaret tight. Mom, you did it. We did it, Margaret corrected. This wasn't just about money, sweetheart. It was about standing up for my worth. Emma pulled back, her eyes glistening. I'm so proud of you. That evening, Margaret sat on her back porch with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The house was quiet, peaceful. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel lonely, it felt like freedom. Her phone buzzed. A text from her friend Diane. Heard what happened in court. You're a legend. Dinner this weekend? Margaret smiled and typed back. Absolutely. I'm buying. She thought about Vincent and Crystal, probably fighting right now about money and blame. She thought about the years she'd spent making herself smaller, trying to be perfect enough to keep a man who never truly valued her. And then she thought about tomorrow, about the art classes she'd signed up for, about the trip to Italy she was planning with Emma, about the small business idea she'd been sketching out, a consulting service for women navigating divorce and financial independence. Margaret had spent 27 years building someone else's dream. Now, finally, it was time to build her own. She raised her teacup to the sunset. To new beginnings, she whispered, and to knowing your worth. The last rays of sunlight seemed to shine just for her, warm and golden and full of promise. Checkmate. Indeed, sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply reclaiming what was always yours. Your dignity, your future, and your joy.